Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are about to embark on a really vivid journey into the life and honestly, the genius mind of Victorian England's absolute greatest voice. I'm talking, of course, about Charles Dickens. Today, we're going to look at how a man born way back in 1812 navigated an era of incredibly rapid industrialization, chaotic urbanization, and just profound inequality. Picture a city totally choked by coal smoke, yet bursting with unprecedented wealth at the exact same time. And somehow, he managed to capture all of that on paper. So just a heads up, this isn't your standard history lesson. It's a deep dive into how one single writer fundamentally shaped public consciousness. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You know the quote, right? It's the incredibly famous opening to A Tale of Two Cities. And with that one line, Dickens brilliantly captured a world of massive contradictions. You had this unprecedented industrial progress sitting quite literally right alongside terrible urban suffering, high comedy masking really deep tragedy. And what makes his work so incredibly timeless is how this exact paradox mirrors our own modern world. He was chronicling a society dealing with the very real human cost of economic progress. And honestly, I'm sure that sounds very familiar to a lot of us today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at a true Victorian rags-to-riches tale. Second, the master of the serialized novel. Third, ghosts, orphans, and reform. Fourth, the era of the dark novels. And finally, his monumental legacy. Section 1, A Victorian rags-to-riches tale, the origin story of a literary giant. Now, to truly understand Dickens, you have to view him as the protagonist of his own incredibly dramatic story. So what hidden childhood trauma actually fueled him? Well, as a boy, Charles loved the theater. He enjoyed a really nice level of middle-class comfort. But he was the second of 8 children born to a naval clerk who had this terrible, almost comical habit of living way, way beyond his means. His dad was throwing these lavish parties on credit while the bills just piled up in the background. And that illusion of stability, it was about to completely shatter. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds. Born in 1812 in Portsmouth, his life took a really sharp turn when the family relocated to London in 1822. Fast forward just 2 years to 1824, and his father's debts finally caught up to him. The result? His dad was thrown into the Marshalsea debtors' prison. Now, this next part is shocking by today's standards. The entire family moved into the cramped prison cell with him. Well, the whole family except 12-year-old Charles. He was pulled out of school and sent away to work. The profound sense of abandonment he felt was immediate, and it was absolute. 6 shillings a week. That was his meager wage at Warren's blocking factory. His job was just endlessly pasting labels onto pots of shoe polish in a literal rat-infested, rotting warehouse overlooking the Thames. I mean, think about the sheer humiliation of falling from a really promising middle-class student to a filthy manual laborer almost overnight. It permanently scarred him, but it also forged this lifelong fierce sympathy for abandoned and vulnerable children. It's a trauma you can see bleeding directly into characters like David Copperfield and Oliver Twist. Moving to Section 2, Master of the Serialized Novel, the Invention of the Cliffhanger. So from that awful childhood trauma emerged this completely unstoppable drive. Working early on as a parliamentary reporter, Dickens honed this incredibly vivid, energetic shorthand style of writing. When he finally started publishing fiction, he essentially became the pioneer of the modern television showrunner model. It was brilliant. By releasing works in affordable monthly shilling installments, he brought literature directly to the masses. And let me tell you, he was ruthless with his chapter endings. He purposefully engineered these agonizing cliffhangers. The suspense was so intense that American readers famously crowded the docks in New York, literally shouting at incoming British ships to find out if the beloved character Little Nell had died. It was truly interactive storytelling, too. He would actually change his plot lines based on whether the audience cheered or rioted in the streets. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer scale of his sudden fame. It was completely unprecedented. His big breakthrough, The Pickwick Papers, was initially just meant to be some light text to accompany a few illustrations. But when he introduced this wisecracking Cockney character named Sam Weller, it triggered absolute Pickwick mania. We are talking Pickwick cigars, Pickwick hats, bootlegged editions, theatrical ripoffs, the whole shebang. He became a bona fide international celebrity almost overnight. Section 3, Ghosts, Orphans, and Reform. Fiction as a Weapon.
Dickens quickly realized something crucial. He didn't just want to entertain people. He wanted to wield his fiction like a weapon to fix a broken society. And he targeted a dizzying array of institutional failures. He aimed right at the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, a law which purposefully designed workhouses to be so thoroughly miserable that people would rather starve out in the streets than seek help. He lampooned the notoriously abusive, unregulated Yorkshire boarding schools. He consistently went after the horrors of systemic child labor and awful urban sanitation. He was using his pen as a sword to strike back on behalf of the vulnerable.
Please, sir, I want some more. I mean, it is arguably the most iconic line in all of English literature. When little Oliver Twist begs for just a little more gruel, Dickens wasn't just writing some cheap tearjerker scene. No, he was creating the ultimate symbol of bureaucratic dehumanization. He was forcing his comfortable, wealthy readers to look directly at what their so-called social reforms actually looked like when placed in the hands of a starving child. To truly grasp why he fought so hard, you really have to understand the Malthusian views on poverty that were incredibly prevalent at the time. Basically, this cold philosophy treated poverty as a quote-unquote natural check on population growth. It argued that charity only encouraged the poor to multiply. This kind of utilitarian math completely disgusted Dickens. It's the exact philosophy he put directly into the mouth of Ebenezer Scrooge when Scrooge coldly talks about decreasing the surplus population in A Christmas Carol. Dickens countered that absolute coldness by humanizing the real consequences of greed. Section 4. The Era of Dark Novels. Optimism tempered by outrage. As Dickens matured into the 1840s and 50s, he unfortunately suffered some very heavy personal losses, including the tragic death of his father and his infant daughter. This personal grief, combined with just constantly watching the destructive forces of unchecked industrialization, profoundly darkened his worldview. And this brilliantly illustrates this shift. You see, his early 20s were defined by exuberant humor, lighthearted comic adventures, sunny optimism. But his later works, they plunged into very somber social critique, trading those bright streets for fog-bound, labyrinthine plots that explored deeply entrenched institutional paralysis. During this era, he systematically dismantled the pillars of Victorian high society, literally book by book. David Copperfield in 1850 allowed him to finally process his own autobiographical trauma regarding class. Bleak House in 1853 was a surgical strike against the endless, life-ruining delays of the Chancery Courts. Hard Times in 1854 skewered those soulless, utilitarian education systems where, as he wrote, facts alone are wanted in life. And in Little Dorrit in 1857, he brought it all full circle, finally writing directly about the Marshalsea debtors' prison as this massive, suffocating metaphor for societal entrapment. But beyond the social messaging, we have to acknowledge he was a true structural genius. Take Bleak House, for instance, where he actually revolutionized the novel form itself by using dual narration. He paired this really cynical, sweeping, omniscient voice with the intimate first-person diary of Esther Summerson. And we absolutely cannot forget his linguistic inventiveness. He gave us these unforgettable, slightly ridiculous symbolic names that told you exactly who a character was before they even spoke a single word. Like, just listen to them: the slimy Uriah Heep, the rigid Mr. Gradgrind, or the pompous Mr. Bumble. Brilliant, right? And finally, Section 5. A monumental literary legacy. The burden we still carry. Throughout his life, Dickens maintained a breakneck pace. He was editing journals, managing charities, doing these incredibly exhausting theatrical readings. But it took an intense physical toll. Actually, his latter years were just as dramatic as any of his plots. In 1858, his scandalous separation from his wife made massive headlines. Then, in 1865, his train derailed over a bridge at Staplehurst. Dickens survived, and get this, he climbed back into the hanging wreckage with a flask of brandy to comfort the dying, and then risked his life a second time to retrieve his manuscript for our mutual friend. Unbelievable. He never fully recovered from that trauma, though. He died of a stroke in 1870, leaving his final mystery, the mystery of Edwin Drood, forever unsolved. So, the crucial point is, the absolute core of his legacy is captured perfectly in his own words. No one is useless in this world who lightens the burden of it to anyone else. Because despite exposing the absolute darkest parts of Victorian hypocrisy, Dickens remained literature's greatest humanist. He truly, deeply believed that personal benevolence, individual charity, and immense empathy were the true keys to redeeming society. Dickens showed his readers the human cost of economic progress. a theme that, unfortunately, has never really gone out of style. So look around at our own turbulent age, an age of rapid technological leaps and widening inequality. I ask you, who is lightening the burden today? Because as Dickens proved, the power to change society often starts simply by changing hearts. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And remember, keep questioning the world around you. Catch you next time.